Hello, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about a subject that is pretty controversial. Only when you're bringing up this subject when Hindu people can hear it. Um, because I know what I'm going to say is going to piss off people of the Hindu persuasion, and that is human sacrifice in ancient India. Human sacrifice in ancient India that is rooted in the Hindu religion. Hinduism has a different face today, obviously, because it has been used to appeal to a certain, or it's been really remarketed to appeal to Westerners. At the same time, they are some very ancient rituals that are very bloody and barbaric that aren't really practiced in India today, except for a few situations here and there that are considered to be crimes. And the reason for this is because, well, when the British controlled India, they cleaned out a lot of these very abhorrent and diabolical rituals. Uh, Probably the most notable one was the ritual in which a woman, after her husband has died, is ritually burned alive. And the British removed this barbaric practice because the British have a Christian influence. Now, that's not to say that the British were innocent or just these amazing civilized people themselves, but the fact is that while the British did do some pretty horrendous things themselves, the Christian influence of the British Empire did indeed purge India of some diabolical practices. The reason for this isn't because of it's not because the British are innately against these things or against violence. It's because of Christianity. Because I'm not going to sit here and say that the British were, just beacons of civility, because the British did some pretty bad things. With that said, let's get right into this subject and let's talk about human sacrifice in ancient India. Human sacrifice in pure, authentic Hinduism. I'm taking my information from this book. It is called "The Roots of Hinduism" by I cannot remember this guy's name, Asko Parpola, and he is a Finnish professor at the University of Helsinki. It's actually a very detailed book. It gets into the roots of Hinduism. There is a lot of theory and a lot of hypothesizing in this book. He does get into like, well, maybe this happened. It's possible that this actually happened. It's possible that Hinduism is heavily influenced by Mesopotamian religion, and he does make a good case for that. At the same time, if you get past all the theories and all the conjecture and all the hypothesizing, there is a lot of interesting information in this book to learn from as far as learning about Hinduism goes. So he describes an ancient ritual that was done in far antiquity in India. And he says here that the Satapatha Brahmana indeed says that the tortoise is the head of the fire altar, and the vital heirs in the tortoise are the vital heirs in the head. The heads of the 5 principal victims are placed in the middle of the lowest brick layer of the fire altar. The human head in the center, surrounded by those of the horse, the cow, the ram, and the sheep, and the sacrificer is required to put into each head 7 chips of gold, 1 into each of the 7 vital heirs of the head: the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth. One reason why the tortoise is connected with the head is likely to be its shell. The words denoting shell often stand also for the shell of the head. So in other words, okay, so they would take a human, they would take a cow, a horse, a ram, and a sheep. They would behead all of them, and then into the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the mouth, and the 2 nostrils, they would put a piece of gold. And out of all the rituals that I read about in this book, out of all the rituals that are described in this book, this one is by far the most bizarre. It's like something out of the Aztec Empire. It's pretty horrendous. It's like something that you would see illustrated in a horror movie like The Green Inferno or Apocalypto. And again, you don't see this happening in India today. Um, you do have cases in India of people actually committing human sacrifice, but again, those are officially categorized as murders. There was a case a number of years ago, I remember posting on this on shootbot.com, of a guy who was ritually murdering people. He owned some sort of a business in India somewhere, and he was actually ritually sacrificing people to the diabolical goddess Kali in order to receive success for his business. And yeah, this actually happened. So you do have cases like this happening in India, but again, it's not in the mainstream. It's not considered, at least by the legislation of the country, as acceptable, although there are definitely people in India who think that it is acceptable, but those people are fanatics and, lunatics. But I do know that there are a lot of people in India, the nationalist types, who do want to bring back true Hinduism or the authentic Hinduism. And if they ever succeed, this type of garbage will come back. Not saying this exact ritual, but you would have some pretty barbaric stuff being done. Like, I don't know, burning some woman alive because her husband died. So in this part of the book, it talks about a holiday called the Mahabharata. And it says here that the Vedic text contains statements indicating that a human victim was once sacrificed on this day and that his flesh was eaten by the participants, as was done on the 10th day of victory until the British period in Karnataka, by men leaving for raids. So these men would go out for raids and they would find a sacrificial victim and kill them, or before going to battle or something, they would have somebody sacrificed. But this practice was done away with thanks to the British. Again, the British did some pretty horrible things. But what good that the British did bring was due to Christian ethics and morality. And I think that European colonization doesn't get enough credit for that. You could find massacres, you could find bad things done by every European empire, but there was a lot of good things that came about from it. Now, there was some pretty horrendous things that happened, like when the Germans were controlling Namibia in South Africa, the Germans committed genocide. That's a fact. In that aspect, that's completely evil. But if you go to, like, if you look at the history of the Spanish Empire, I think the Spanish Empire was probably the most civil out of all of the Western empires. The Spanish Empire was pretty civil. You do have some instances of massacres that happened, but for the most part, Spanish Empire was pretty good. I think the Spaniards were a lot more ethical than the others. That's why, for example, you can go into former Spanish colonies like Peru or Mexico, and you find a lot of indigenous people living there. But you go to North America, and you don't really find a whole lot of natives. Now, granted, a lot of the natives were wiped out by disease, and that was not to the fault of the English. But the English, I would say, were a lot more brutal than the Spaniards were. Just my own thought on that. The idea of human sacrifice is rooted in Hinduism. And it's rooted, to a great extent, in the creation myth that is in Hinduism. So it talks about primeval man. And it says here that the human victim represented the primeval man, or Purusa, out of whose severed limbs the world came into being according to the Rig Veda. Now, you can find this in a lot of ancient religions. You can find this in ancient Indo-European religion. For example, you find this in the Scandinavian belief, Scandinavian mythology, that talks about how a certain number of deities, I think Wotan or Odin was one of them, I'm not sure, they took a primeval man and broke him to pieces, severed him to pieces, and from that came the creation of the universe, or the creation of the world. So you find this pattern in ancient Indo-European religion. The Rig Veda is a part of that Indo-European mythology. And while, of course, it does have its differences, there are a lot of similarities with the other Indo-European myths. And so there is this idea that from chaos and destruction and death and gore comes order and creation. It kind of sounds like a Jordan Peterson speech, you know. From creation comes order, but you know you gotta have a balancing equilibrium. You gotta have a balanced system. You need chaos because from chaos comes discipline, and it comes a knowing of the unknown, and you surpass and transcend your fears. But without order, you just have chaos, and that's not good. Like it's like that. A lot of neo-Nazis, and I'm not saying Jordan Peterson is a neo-Nazi, although there are Nazis who like him. But a lot of neo-Nazis like getting into this sort of thing, like from chaos comes order, from violence and just complete gore and strength comes order and balance. And to me, it's like an incremental step towards allowing human sacrifice, like sanctifying human sacrifice. You know, from death comes order. And the Aztecs had this belief. That's why they killed so many people, because they believed that by killing people, by shedding human blood, they would bring equilibrium to the atmosphere, to the crops, and they would get their food for the year. So in order to bring order into nature, you need chaos, and a lot of it. And that type of belief system leads to innocent people being killed. So it goes on to say that sacrifice of a human warrior to the goddess is implied by the Mahisa Asura myth, and indeed South Indian heroes are supposed even to have cut off their own heads in order to secure the goddess's favor and victory to their king. The severed head of a warrior, recognizable from the double bun hair braid at the nape of the neck, is placed on an offering table in front of a deity inside a fig tree, whose worship is depicted on a famous Hindu seal. Yeah, so there you go. There's more about this in this book. I'll give you guys one last example here. So let's see. So it talks about child sacrifice in this part, and it says, votive offerings of firstborn babies to crocodiles were performed by couples wanting offspring in Bengal until around 1810. I wonder how that practice got purged out. A similar promise to sacrifice his firstborn son was forced upon King Hariskandra when he approached God Varuna for an heir in the Vedic Sunhasepa legend recited at the royal consecration. Yeah. So there you go. So if the Hindu nationalists want true Hinduism, and you have all of these Breitbart lunatics and fanatics who are like, yeah, Indian nationalism is good, don't be shocked if you see horrendous practices being done in India. Because if you want to go back to true Hinduism, you got to bring in the altars and start killing a bunch of people. So, yeah, there you go, guys. You want Hindu nationalism? Prepare for blood. If you want Hindu nationalism, there will be blood. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.